The rule of thirds is one of the most popular rules of composition because it's simple and effective. It creates an interesting balance between the foreground and the background and adds depth and interest to a frame. What is the rule of thirds? Well, it's pretty simple. You take a frame like this one here that we're in, and you add 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines equally spaced throughout the frame. That divides the frame into thirds, 9 equal sized squares. And then what you do is you add interesting points throughout the frame on the vertical lines, the horizontal lines, and the intersect points. The rule is that if you add stuff to these lines and intersect points, it's going to capture the viewer's attention and add interest to the frame, more depth, and a better balance too. So let's have a look at that in process now. But I will say one thing. It's called the rule of thirds. It's really the guide of thirds. There's no rules to photography composition, they're merely guides. But when you understand how the rule works, then you can understand how to use it effectively and when to break it. So I'm just standing here in front of a monument, and I'm going to take a photo just ignoring the rule of thirds. So we have a statue up here. I've taken a photo, and instead of adding the rule of thirds, I've put the subject right bang in the middle of the frame. What this does is makes any viewer who looks at my photo look directly into the center, take in whatever it is they're looking at, and then probably look away. Not really that interesting. However, when I add the rule of thirds and I put him off to the right third, we also have another statue over here. And now, anytime a viewer looks at my photo, they're going to spend more time looking at it. They're going to look at one person on the right, 2 people on the left, and it's going to add more depth and interest to the photo. It makes a more interesting balance. That's the most simple way of describing how the rule of thirds works. If you were to take a photo and just put me bang in the middle of it, not really that interesting. But when you add the rule of thirds, you open up the frame and you can add more depth and interest. So let's talk about how we can use the rule of thirds. First of all, one of the most popular uses for the rule of thirds is when you're shooting people. So I'm standing here in the frame here. Now, I'm over on the right-hand side of this photo, so it would make sense for me to look into the frame like this. However, if you're using the rule of thirds and you put me on the right-hand side and I'm facing the right, then I'm looking out of the frame. All of this space over here is no longer being looked at. So if we keep the camera over here so I'm on the right third, but I'm looking out, that really doesn't add to the photo. The reason being is when you look at a photo, you're going to look at me and you're going to follow my eye lines. And if I'm looking out of the frame, then, well, this whole area of depth and interest doesn't get the attention that it deserves because I'm no longer shifting the focus into the frame, I'm shifting the focus out of the frame. Let's go and have a look at using the rule of thirds on a horizon too. Down here by the river now, and I want to show you how the rule of thirds works when it comes to using the lines in the frame. So I'm looking over to Buda, the other side of Budapest. And although this area is really interesting, over here there's not a lot going on, and this is what I'm going to capture. I'm going to try and make something dull looking just that little bit more interesting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to completely ignore the rule of thirds and take a photo. About 40% of the frame is a river, 40% of the frame is the sky, and there's a little slither in the middle there of the other side of the river. Right in the middle, not really that interesting, and certainly not good composition. We're going to stay with this subject here, which is still not particularly interesting, and I'm going to try and make it that little bit more interesting by moving the horizon down in the frame to the bottom third line. What that does is that allows us to prioritize the slightly more interesting sky, which has got some interesting clouds today, while ignoring this river where there's pretty much nothing going on. Okay, so a little bit more interesting, but still not perfect. What can we do to add more interest to this frame? Well, instead of shooting directly across, I'm going to shoot over to my right here now. So what we have is a dock, which is where the rivers come and they take cruisers and taxis along the river. And as I look through my viewfinder, I can see that it's actually lining up with a few different areas of the frame that we would want to intersect when we use the rule of thirds. So in the bottom, okay, so it might not be the most interesting photo in the world, but you can certainly see a stark difference between the first photo that shoots directly across the river with the horizon straight in the middle of the frame, and the last photo where we shoot slightly off. We have some interest leading into the frame to an intersect point. We have the top third line on the horizon and the bottom third line on the barge. Much more interesting, there's more to look at, and the composition is more creative. As well as dividing up the frame into thirds, adding interesting points on the lines and the intersect points, what we can do is we can divide the frame up into different quadrants. So the 1, 2, and 3 columns, we can place interesting aspects of the photo into these columns to break it up and again add depth and interest. So over here I have 3 trees that are staggered and are leading into the Parliament over on the right hand side. As I take a photo, I have 1 tree in each section of the photo. If I was to change that, and if I was to shoot with just this main tree right in the middle on its own, not for a very interesting photo, because these other trees are really just distracting you rather than leading you into the frame. And if I try and line these up with the third lines, that also works, but it's really a case of experimenting for yourself and seeing what you think looks the best. The rule of thirds isn't just popular in photography, it's popular in everything, especially design and architecture. We're just walking past the Hungarian Parliament building here, stunning building, and I just noticed as we went past that it's divided up into 3 sections on the front face. There's also these parts over on the left and the right. It's a symmetrical building, at least from this side, and you can see it's divided up into 1, 2, 3 sections. And inside these sections, it's also broken up again. So this middle section, for example, we can see 3 archways with 3 pairs of windows at the top. This is a very popular rule, the rule of thirds. You'll see it everywhere. We were heading over to a park, which is our next location, and we've stopped twice already. We see 2 sets of 3 trees over here. We see 3 different faces on the front of this building. It's used for stability, interest, and balance. So the rule of thirds is a very popular rule to bear in mind when you're shooting photography. In this final section of the video, I'm going to be talking about using what's already in your frame to intersect with the guidelines of the rule of thirds. So you'll see that I'm framed here on the left third line. On the right third line is this lamppost over here. It adds depth and interest to the frame, an interesting balance between the foreground and the background, and it also helps to add stability. So this is what you should be looking for when you're shooting the rule of thirds. Look around your frame and see, how can I add new guidelines, new vertical lines, horizontal lines, and intersect points to make the photo more interesting and add depth and interest. This could just be a photo of me, a video of me. If you pan the camera now, so I'm just in the middle of the frame, you'll see that that's not really that interesting. However, when we pan back, you'll see more depth and interest to this frame. So although when you're shooting a video of a person talking, you might want them directly in the middle of the frame, when it comes to photography, that doesn't make for a particularly interesting composition. So always look to add depth and interest by using the rule of thirds. The more you know about a composition, the more rules you understand, the more rules you can break. And the better your guidance will be when it comes to taking photos. When you pick up your camera, you will intuitively know what to look for. You won't even think, okay, do I want to use the rule of thirds here? You just know that, okay, if I add this in here over here, and I have this person in the front, and then in this intersect point is this, you'll know that your photos are going to become much more interesting. And that's why the rule of thirds is so great. It's the most basic rule of composition because it's simple and it works. So thanks very much for watching. That is the rule of thirds.